Good morning, everyone. In accordance with our yeshiva's posek of Shechter Shlita, today we're going to be commemorating both Yom Hazikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut on the exact same day. On the one hand, today when we remember the soldiers defending Eretz Yisrael, the victims of terror who were killed in Eretz Yisrael. Very sad day. But on the other hand, we're meant to remember and to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut as well, a day of celebration, a day of simcha. How do we make sense of these two seemingly opposing emotions that we're supposed to have in our hearts and in our minds on a day like today? This past Simchas Torah, I was dancing hakafos in Eish Kodesh, in the 5 towns. And as we knew what was going on in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Moshe Weinberger Shlita, the Rav of the Shul, got up and he was crying hysterically about what he heard what was going on, even though we didn't fully understand what was going on. And it was hard for all of us to dance. It was hard for me to dance. And at one point, as we were leaving, I asked Rav Weinberger, I said, how do we dance? How do we have a Simchas Torah when we know what's going on right now in Eretz Yisrael? And Rav Weinberger looked at me and he said, a Yid always needs to be able to hold multiple emotions in his heart and in his mind at the same time. We need to be able to feel the pain of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael on the one hand, but also feel the simcha of Simchas Torah on the other hand. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we're here doing today. We're meant to feel pain and sorrow on the one hand, but simcha on the other hand. Just to give everyone a brief sense of what the schedule of the day is going to be. We're going to begin in a few moments by hearing from Rabbi Avi Morel, Dovi's father, a Heichal parent, who's going to talk about his nephew, who Rachmana Litzlan was killed in Gaza this year. Then we're going to make a siyum on Seder Zraim in honor and in memory and le'ilei nishama, the soldiers and the victims of terror who have been killed in Eretz Yisrael. And then we're going to have closing remarks from Rabbi Menachem Penner, the executive vice president of the RCA, the former head of Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan in NYU, as he closes the program. I would also like to thank Avrami Ganuth, Gabriel Glass, Eli Schwartz, and Moshe Weitzman in particular for making this program possible today. This past February, I was in Eretz Yisrael. I was speaking with guys in Yeshivat Shalavim. And as I'm walking into the Beis Medrash, I see one of my Rebbeim, one of the Mashgichim in Shana Bet, Rabbi Ezra Shapiro. He's sitting in the corner of the Beis Medrash crying. I wasn't sure if I should go over to him. We were very close when I was in yeshiva, and I went over to him and I said, Rebbe, is everything okay? And he said, unfortunately, my very, very good friend's son got severely injured in Gaza, and things are not looking good. The next day I saw Rav Ezra. He was still crying. And he told me that unfortunately, Ma'oz Morel had succumbed to his wounds and he died. That night I was going back to America, but I figured, I don't know the Morels at all, but how can I not at least be Menachem Avel on my way to the airport to hear a little bit about this holy, holy Jew who was taken from us way too early and way too young. Took a bunch of boys from the yeshiva and we drove that night during dinner to the home of Ma'oz Morel and his family as we paid a shiva call, as we were Menachem Avel. What I heard, this incredible young man, who he was, what he stood for, what he lived for, and what he died for, was truly incredible. At the Shiva call, I saw Rabbi Avi Morel being Menachem Avel for his brother who just lost his son. At this time, we're going to please give our undivided attention to Rabbi Morel as he tells us about his nephew, Ma'oz.
While Israel has had a lot of wars, I kind of feel like for us as Americans, this one feels a little bit closer for us as Americans. I remember when I was growing up in elementary school, I knew about Yom Ha'atzmaut, but I don't remember much about Yom Hazikaron and talking about the fallen soldiers. I remember that when we said Yizkor in Shul, before everyone went out, the rabbi had a special Yizkor tefillah that he said for the victims of the Holocaust, the Shoah, and there was another one for the victims of soldiers who had died in battle. And I remember them doing that every year, but it felt a kind of distant. And then when I was in 10th grade, the same age as some of you, I spent the year with my family in Israel, and I went to an Israeli high school. And comes Yom Hazikaron, and they all gather and have an assembly like this, but it was in the courtyard of the school. And they get up to the part where they're saying the Yizkor Tefillah, and they say the standard nusach that I remembered from school, Tzva Haganah Chayalei Tzva Haganah Yisrael, Shenafshu, Naflu Kiddush Hashem, Ha'am Ve'aretz. And then all of a sudden, the nusach changes, and whoever it was, I don't remember whether it was the principal or the assistant principal who was reading it, says, Uveinehem Bogrenu, and among them are our alumni, and proceeds to read a list of names. For the first time it hit me that like the same courtyard in school that I was in was like some of those same people, just a few grades ahead of me, might be those people. And then a couple of years later, I came back and I was in Shalvim, and it comes Yom Kippur, and they say this Yizkor, and they say the same tefillah for Tzva Haganah Yisrael, Chayalei Tzva Haganah Yisrael, Shenaflu Kiddush Hashem Ha'am Ve'aretz, and all of a sudden, they have all these names to add in. So I felt, this may have a little more to do with me personally, but still, it felt kind of far away because that's them and that's me. And even though, when I was in Shalom, I visited Har Herzl and I understood the soldiers and I understood about the sacrifice. But, I'm American. That's them. And I feel like in this war, there's so many people in our communities who have so many people in Eretz Yisrael, and so many people have cousins or this or that, or people in the army, and we know so much what's going on, for better or for worse, because of the technology. It feels, all of a sudden, a little closer. And then in midwinter vacation, I was with my son Dovi in Eretz Yisrael, and I heard that a guy who I went to Shalvim with myself, and then was in America with a little bit, was sitting Shiva for his own son. And I started to realize this is not really them anymore. This is us, because this guy could have been me, and we had the same background together. And so I made sure I wanted to bring Dovi to the Shiva because I wanted him to have an inkling of an understanding, which is very hard, and I didn't have this either, that this is not just them. This is us. And I thought to myself, if I don't take Dovi to this Shiva, who knows if he'll ever have an opportunity. I don't know where he's going to go to yeshiva. I don't know who his friends are going to be. Who knows if he'll ever have an opportunity to feel like this is us. And then 3 weeks later, we got a big reminder in our family that this is us. And so I'll tell you about my nephew Maoz, a little bit about how he lived, a little bit about how he died. I have a lot to learn from it myself, and I'll share it with you. First thing you have to know is that Dovi's fourth of four brothers, and his older brothers and he all went to a Ben Chamesh Lemikra school under the Zilberman method. You know what that means? Ben Chamesh Lemikra. You start learning when you're 5 years old Chumash from Vayikra. And you learn Mishnah for a lot of years until you've learned a lot of Mishnah. They don't start Gemara as early as they otherwise do. And you have school every single day of the year, except for Tisha B'Av, when you're not allowed to learn, including Shabbos if you live close enough. And this worked pretty well for Maoz's older brothers. And for Maoz, this wasn't so simple, because Maon had some learning disabilities, and he struggled academically. And so reading was harder. He did it, but it was harder. And maybe they didn't have all the kind of accommodations that we're accustomed to in our schools here today. And his parents decided, along with him, that maybe we have to go to like a little more of a normal school, where you have a normal day and normal summer vacation, and that's what he did. But during elementary school, it still was a real struggle for him. He was very good at sports. He was a good kid, did everything right. He was good at karate. He became like a karate, whatever they call it, and he played American flag football, and he did all these different things, but studying was very hard for him. But he was very, very determined to get into a very good high school. Now you have to understand, in the Israeli world of these yeshivot tichoniot, getting into high school is very, very difficult. It's even harder than getting into Heichal. And he wanted to go to this particular yeshiva in Dimona, which is in the Negev. And he really, really did everything he could to get in. But once he got in, it was really hard. Because, as you all know, high school is a lot of learning. And this yeshiva was a very serious yeshiva. And so he'd sit down at the Beis Medrash every day, and his chavrusa would tell the story. He'd sit down, he'd read a line, Gemara. Lo hevanti. I didn't understand. Let's try it again. Lo hevanti. Again and again and again, till finally he would get it. But the thing he had was that he was extremely determined. And he wasn't afraid to ask. He asks his friends, he asks his rebbeim, and over and over again, he did the best he could, and he really struggled, but he got to the end. And it was still hard for him, and he was not in the A track, whatever they call it, but he did the best he could. But, you know, he was a nice kid, and everyone liked him because he was a nice kid. 12th grade, he mentions to my brother, his father, Derech Agav, by the way, I'm making a siyum on Shisha Sidra Mishnah. My brother said, what do you mean you're making a siyum on Shisha Sidra Mishnah? You can't make a siyum on Shisha Sidra Mishnah because that's not something you... So no, I'm making... So what do you do? He said, well, I was in 9th grade, and I thought to myself, and I figured out that if I learn a certain number of Mishnayos every single day, by the time I finish high school, I'll be able to do it. So I just did it. This is Gemara and sitting for a long time. That's harder for me, but this is something I can do. My brother said, what do you mean? We have to make a big siyum. They don't make siyumim all over the world like they do in Heichal, like this was a chiddush. We have to make a big siyum. He said, I don't have to make a big siyum. No. We're making a siyum. So it's fine. They made the siyum. And then he wanted to get afterwards into it. So he wanted to go further. So he wanted to go to a Hesder yeshiva. Hesder yeshiva, you all pretty much know, you learn, and then you go to the army, and you learn again. The problem is the Hesder yeshiva he wanted to get into was one that he decided was going to be the best for him, no matter what. And this yeshiva, he sits down at the Bechina, and they said to him, I don't really know if this is for you. You know, here in this yeshiva, we learn Gemara all day. And you're determined, but your reading skills are really not that great. He calls a friend who had previously been an alumnus of that yeshiva, told him they called him back and forth, and he somehow got them into them. And the yeshiva, against their better judgment, they felt, took him in. And there was the same thing in yeshiva. Every morning, sit down, try again, lo hevanti. again and again, till finally he got it. But what ended up happening is that even though he was not the star Gemara student, and by the way, he maybe wasn't even the biggest masmid, and the Rebbeim started looking at him and saying, wow, this is an inspiration to us. Because this kid comes in every single day and does absolutely the best he can. And also when he was in yeshiva, he learned that in addition to learning Gemara, there's so many other things that he could learn. He can learn machshava, he can learn parsha, he can learn so many other things. Listen to this, and I didn't know this till today. I'm going to skip ahead for a minute. Posthumously, after he passed away, the army brings his stuff. And this takes a long time to get the stuff from different places. And just 2 days ago, they find these notebooks were with him in the army. And the notebooks are the things that he had written notes to himself. And it says on the top, it's personal. He didn't want to leave it at home. He took it to the army. Listen to a list, and I bet you this comes from probably around 11th, 12th grade. Because he has a list of what he wants to learn during summer vacation. I mean, this is a kid who has learning disabilities. It's difficult for him. Here's the list. Hachsharas Avrechim. That's a book of Rav Cohen Miskalman of Piatzetsna, similarly to the Eish Kodesh. Mishnah Brura, Mesilas Yesharim. Shnai Mikra Vechad Targum. I'm actually reading this list. It was just published today. Rambam. Maseches Tainis. This is his list for what he's going to do. And he pushed himself by creating lists of goals and to-dos for himself, and nobody knew about it till just a couple days ago. He was just a regular kid for anyone who knew him. Comes time for the army. Now, Hesder people get drafted, but he decided that he said, he's learning and he's doing the best he can, but this is not going to be where he's going to make his biggest contribution. So he decides to try out. Within the Tzanchanim, the paratroopers, they have a special group called Sayeret Tzanchanim, which is a special commando reconnaissance unit, and it's extremely difficult to get in. But he was very athletic, and he tried to push himself, because he said to himself, this is a contribution I can make. I can only get so far in yeshiva, but if I do this, it means I have to leave Hesder. Leave Hesder means I stay in the army for another few years. I don't come back to yeshiva. So that's what he did. And he got in. And during those years, it was extremely difficult. Just to give you an idea, most of these army people who are running around in Gaza had 7 months of training before they could get there. He had 14 months. But he made a list for himself before he went into the army as to what he's planning to do in the army and to make sure that his army experiences, for example, this is a written list we just discovered. Learn every day, Shnayim Mikra, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Mesilas Yesharim. This army training is not a simple thing. And this special Sayeret Tzanchanim thing is an extremely not separate thing. Again, I just say it over and over. This is a regular kid. This was not a top shiur. This is not just a regular kid trying to do the thing. Try to go back to yeshiva for Shabbos. Write a question in halacha down in your notebook every single day. So he goes into the army, and they finish the 14 months of training just before the war starts. And then they have to go to the war. Now, before the war starts, this is what happens. It's Simchas Torah, you all know, and he was actually off for Simchas Torah. So he was visiting a friend away from his parents' house at Simchas Torah, and he sees what's happening in the morning, and he knows that because of who he is and the kind of work that he's doing and the top-level thing, that he's going to have to go. So he drives back home on Simchas Torah morning. He was home for like 8 minutes, didn't see all his family because of two things, drove straight out, went to his base, and helicoptered straight down to a place called Re'im. Now, I'd never heard of Re'im before this, but the Re'im is the kibbutz where the concert was. And they have a job for 2 days where because there's still terrorists running around, where they're securing the area. And after 2 days, when the area is relatively secure, they say to them, we know you're not trained for this, but would anyone like to volunteer? Because there are lots and lots of bodies here. Jewish bodies, Hamas bodies, concert bodies, full bodies, incomplete bodies. We need to move them. Ma'oz volunteers, and that's his job at the beginning. And after 2 weeks of training, and during this time, they're living in the kibbutzim. Now, when you're living in the kibbutzim, they're in these abandoned houses of kibbutzim, and when you're in Sayeret Tzanchanim, unlike regular Hesder, you're not with religious guys. There's only a couple religious guys in the whole group. So everything you do, and that's a whole different challenge that we don't have time to speak about now, about what it is to live like that, and the kind of commitment you have to have, and it's doable, but it requires commitment. So he has a halachic problem because the guys start cooking in these kibbutz kitchens, in these homes. What can he do? What can he use? So he calls a Rav, who's a posek, who he regularly asks questions, and the Rav explains the situation and what they're going to do, and the Rav is matir to him in this situation, under those situations, to use these particular kalim after a certain period of time and what he has to do. And then it comes time to go into Aza. Now, when you go into Aza, there are no phones. So the commander tells everyone, okay, everyone, call your parents. This is the last time you're going to speak to them. I don't know what's going to be again. We're giving away the phones. But it was Shabbos. So everyone else called their parents. He goes in, he gives up the phones. And when in Aza, they had such fierce battles, and they lived, as you'll see now and here, in the homes of the Gazans. That's the way it happens. They break into a house, they make sure there are no Hamas people around, they secure the house, they go upstairs, they clean out the house, they guard the house, and they stay in the house. Now, if you're a regular Israeli guy, if you need a towel, you take a towel. You need whatever you need, and if you need their kitchen, they use their kitchen. Now, the food's kosher because you're bringing your own army food. Everything you have, you own on your back, but it's very, very bad. It's basically the worst tuna fish you've ever had in a can with bread 3 meals a day. And so the guys are trying to make it a little more palatable and heat it up. So he has the same shilas in the kitchen, but fortunately, he had asked the shilas before, because here there's no one to ask and no one to talk to. The battles in Aza are extremely difficult. He was there for close to 100 days. And among his friends, he had everything you own, you have on your back. So there's not anything you could take with you. But he had a pocket Mesilas Yesharim with him. Whenever they had a break, he'd be learning Mesilas Yesharim. This is the edus from the guys who were with him. To the extent that one of the Chiloni guys says, I want to learn Mesilas Yesharim with you. And this was his thing. They're Mesilas Yesharim learning. He wrote to his parents at one point, you can't contact your parents. There's no speaking to your parents. There's no speaking to anyone for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. But at one point, there was a message to go out. There's someone coming if there's anyone we can send. So he wanted 3 things. He wanted, again, a regular kid. Not the biggest masmid in the world. Probably not the biggest tzaddik in the world. He wanted 3 things. He wanted a watch, a digital camera, so he can take pictures of some of the crazy things they're seeing. And he wanted a Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. By the way, this last point was said at one of the Hespedim and reported in one of the English news. It says that all he wanted was 2 Bibles and a translation. Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. And for the guys, he was a Kiddush Hashem, not just because he was frum, and they saw that and respected that, which is very difficult in these situations, but because he was always there for every one of them. And they knew it. And at the end, they had battles where he literally had bullets whizzing over his head. And I'll tell you what happened in the final battle, because we're in high school here and people like the gory details. They had taken a house, and they were staying in this house, like I mentioned. They stayed in this house for a long time, a few days. You can't not go outside. How do you go to the bathroom? Ask me later. It's not pashut. There's no water. So they stayed. By the way, why were they staying? Just good to know. Why were they staying in this house for so long? Because they were waiting for people to clear civilians out of the areas so that they don't hurt any civilians. So just a Hamas guy apparently broke into the house and threw a grenade into the room that he was. He was actually outside the room. One of their guy, Chevra, was killed. Others were wounded, so he immediately jumps up and starts taking care of the wounded and helping them. And one guy, his commander, he actually saved his life. And as they're wheeling the people out in their stretchers and taking everyone out, and in fact, his commander said to him, they learned this afterwards, His commander said to him as they're carrying them out, he turns to him, he says, Ani somech aleichem. I'm relying on you guys now. Ve'am Yisrael somech aleichem. This is what the non-religious commander tells his people. They get him out. Ma'oz goes up to the top of the roof, and they're fighting against the Hamas guys. And in the fighting, an explosion, a house right across, probably as close from me as to the bima, exploded, and a projectile went into his head and lodged in his brain. And just like he was taken into Gaza, or not into Gaza, but into just outside Gaza in a helicopter on Simchas Torah, he left in a helicopter as well. And he was in Beersheba in a hospital in 20 minutes. And during that time, he was basically in an unconscious state in the ICU for about 5 days. And this is significant because during this time, you're only allowed 2 people in an ICU. You should never know. People are pouring in from all over his life because even though he was this quiet, unassuming guy, he left a huge impact on so many people. Friends who got out of the army were in. They stayed by his bedside for Shabbos. Rebbeim came. People came from all over. Non-religious parents of other guys in the group who lived all the way in the north of Israel came all the way down just to see. It was an unbelievable, unbelievable thing. He had one Rebbe who was a close Rebbe of his who stayed, and he came to visit like so many other people, and it was a terrible sight because all these people had a connection with. And he stays there all night by his bedside in the ICU. Afterwards, we learn that Rebbe himself was on a 3-day furlough from Gaza himself. And so before he went to his wife and 6 kids, this was his all-night thing. And then I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to skip a few of the things I wanted to tell you. One of the most moving things in the hospital was some of the comrades who were wounded in the hospital to have their parents wheel them down in their wheelchairs into his ICU room to thank him for helping them and to say goodbye. I have a lot more I could say about Ma'oz, but I'm cognizant of them. I'm going over time. I want to tell you a few things that I learned from Ma'oz for myself, and maybe be relevant for you as well. The first is, to be an amazing Jew, you do not have to be the smartest guy. You just have to take whatever kochos you have. I have to take whatever kochos I have. And when I need help, I need to ask for it. And if I'm an adult in the room or a teacher or a neighbor, I need to be the kind of person who people are comfortable asking because there are people who are going to need it. Next, you have to be kovea itim. If Ma'oz could be kovea itim in this kind of situation, it's very hard for anyone else to think about a similar situation as there. Next, we sometimes think about the people who make impacts in life as being like a rabbi or a leader, and that's very good. And if any of you can do that, please, I encourage you to do so. But if you can't, or if you find yourself not, you could have a huge impact on people just by doing what you need to do quietly exactly where you are. Finally, almost finally, the appreciation of the sacrifice. The sacrifice is huge, and so many people are making it. When we were in the intensive care unit, there was another family there, another Frum family, who had a son who hadn't woken up in a month, and they were trying to wake him, unsuccessfully. And the army sets you up at a hotel, and I was standing at the hotel counter, probably, the card doesn't work, they have to remagnetize it, that's happened to people. And I see this father there also, basic Frum Dati Lumi guy with a kippah sruga. And I look at him, and he recognizes me from the ICU, and I recognize him from the ICU, and I didn't know what to say to him. I just said, kasha, it's hard. So he turns to me, regular guy, says, Eretz Yisrael nikneit b'yisurim. The land of Israel is only acquired through Yisurim, through suffering. Now, it's one thing to hear a rabbi in a shul say something like that in a speech, or a Rebbe. But to hear a guy, and this was his Messiach Lefi Tuma, we were just having a conversation. And this was the father of the kid who himself is there. And there are so many people like that. Ma'oz was one person, but there are so many Ma'ozes out there. So many people. So I have more to say, but the time is up. But I hope that we all, and myself, take these lessons, think about these things, and think about the extent to which our lives, remember that? And the way that these people have had an impact on our lives. Because every time and everywhere you go to Israel, you don't see it, but underneath you is someone who sacrificed for you to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Morel. There was a big gadol in the 20th century of Yisrael Zev Gustman. He was a dayan on the Beis Din of Rav Chaim Ozer in Vilna. He started Netzach Yisrael in Rechavia. He was a Holocaust survivor and a massive Talmid Chacham. He used to give a shiur in Rechavia after he escaped the war and made his way to Eretz Yisrael in the yeshiva to the people of the community. There was one individual who came to his shiur, a professor at Hebrew University. His name was Professor Yisrael Alman. One day, during the year 1982, the Lebanon War broke out. Professor Alman's son was killed. His name was Shlomo. Rav Gustman mobilized the yeshiva. They got all of the students together. They joined him in performing the mitzvah of Kvuras HaMeis. They went to Har Herzl. And at the Beis HaKvaros, as they're experiencing and watching all of the graves of the soldiers who were killed, they could tell that Rav Gustman was anxious. They could tell that Rav Gustman was agitated. He was looking at the rows of graves, the young men, the soldiers who died, defending the land of Eretz Yisrael. On the way back from the cemetery, Rav Gustman turned to one of the individuals in the car and he said to them, "They are all Kedoshim. They are all holy." Another passenger in the car questions Rav Gustman and he said, "Even the non-religious soldiers?" And Rav Gustman said, "Every single one of them." Rav Gustman then turned to the driver and he said, "Please take me to Professor Alman's home so that I can be Menachem Avel, and I can be with him as he begins sitting Shiva for his beloved son, who was killed defending Eretz Yisrael." At one point, as Rav Gustman's sitting there with his Talmud, Professor Alman, who just lost his son, Rav Gustman says to him, "I'm sure that you don't know this. I don't talk about it. It's very private to me. But I had a son named Meir. He was a beautiful child, and during the Holocaust, he was taken from my arms and he was executed right in front of my very eyes." He said, "My Meir is a Kadosh. He is holy. He and all of the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust are all Kedoshim, they are all holy." But then Rav Gustman added, he said, "Professor, I'll tell you exactly what is happening right now in the Olam HaEmes, what is happening right now in Gan Eden. My Meir is welcoming your son Shlomo into the minyan, right next to the Kisei HaKavod. And my son is saying to your son, 'I died because I am a Jew. But I wasn't able to save anyone else. But you, Shlomo, you died defending the Jewish people and the land of Eretz Yisrael.'" Rav Gustman said, "My Meir is a Kadosh, he is certainly holy. But your Shlomo is the Shliach Tzibor of that minyan up in Shemayim." Rav Gustman continued and he said that, "I never had the opportunity to sit Shiva for my son Meir. Let me sit here with you a little bit longer as we sit Shiva together." Professor Alman replied and he said, I thought that I would never experience nechama after losing my son. But you, Rebbe, have comforted me during this moment in my life. We are about to learn Mishnayos in honor of the soldiers, in honor of the victims of terror, who are representing each and every one of us right now in that minyan up in Shemayim, right next to the Kisei HaKavod. They risked their lives for us. They gave up their lives for us. We couldn't go to Eretz Yisrael if not for the sacrifices that they made, if not for them giving up their lives. As many point out, the word Mishnah has the same letters as the word Neshama. That's why many times when someone passes away, we learn Mishnayos to raise up the Neshama of that person who passed away. Right now we're going to learn Mishnayos B'Chavrusa. Everyone has the Mishnayos of Seder Zram, discussing, of course, the mitzvos Taluyos Ba'aretz, mitzvos that are very much connected to Eretz Yisrael. As we have in mind all of the soldiers, all of the victims of terror who gave up their lives, not for some other people, but they gave up their lives for each and every one of us. So let's please have all of them in mind for the next little bit. We'll let you know. Hopefully we'll move along a little bit. We'll let you know when we're going to make the Hadran as we make the Siyum together.
If anyone does not have the Mishnahs, just raise your hand and we will get it to you.
Got a page from daughter and Yuki.
2 minutes. Anyone need more than 2 minutes? 2 more minutes?
I'm not speaking. I'm not speaking. Apologize. Certainly the last thing we want to do is stop the Kol Torah from continuing, but the time is late. Before we make the Hadron and our Messiah Seder Zura Mazi Yeshiva, we're going to ask the Executive Vice President of the RCA, Rabbi Menachem Penner, to share a few words with us and to put today into perspective.
B'shus, the Rabbeim, the Rosh Hashiva. Today is, in fact, a very dark day, because they just set up the lights for that. The experience of Yom Hazikaron is very, very different depending on who you are and where you are. The experience of anti-Semitism in general, the experience of Arab and Palestinian anti-Semitism is very different, depending on where you live, when you live, and where you find yourself when tragedy strikes. It's very difficult for us here in America to appreciate what Yom Hazikaron is in Israel. I don't know if any of you have ever been in Israel on Yom Hazikaron, but it's certainly nothing like Memorial Day in America. I don't think any of us think twice to ignore Memorial Day in America, to just have fun in Memorial Day on America. You're saying, is Memorial Day memorial for the soldiers? Yes, it's supposed to be in America, but it's a big country, it's an old country, and it's one where it's very difficult for us to appreciate who's been lost and the sacrifice that they made so that we could have certain freedoms, that we could have certain things. Yom HaZikaron in Israel is nothing like the way we experience it here. We have an assembly. They find some guy who's willing to come speak for a few minutes. You do your best. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's really a day of mourning. It's really a day where people walk to the military cemeteries and they walk to see people that they know that died fighting for Eretz Yisrael. More than 25,000 people who have died in the wars. 25,000, that's a lot of people for Klal Yisrael. 25,000 people who have died in the wars so that we could have the state of Israel. Every year it's different. Every year that moment where the siren goes off in Israel. This year I understand they observed it on the El Al plains as well, in midair. every year when that siren goes off, it's different than anything else you can experience outside of Israel. But this Yom Hazikaron is different. 760 soldiers, 834 civilians who have been killed since Shmini Atzeres, on Shmini Atzeres and since Shmini Atzeres. It's real. It's personal. Everyone in Israel knows someone who was killed. And if you don't have a connection yourself to someone who's died in the last 6 months, the last 7 months, then you know someone. Every single person in this room knows someone who is mourning today because they know someone who has been killed since Shmini Atzeres or on Shmini Atzeres. But not only is Yom HaZikaron different, and it is every single year, but October 7th was different. Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, was very, very different if you happen to be in America or you happen to be in Israel. And there it didn't matter so much whether you were an Israeli or you're an American. It matters where you happen to be for Yontiv. My children, one branch of the Penners, are in Beit Shemesh, and they happened to be in America at the time, and they had sort of the American experience of October 7th. And then there were some of you who may have been in Eretz Yisrael for Sukkot, and you had the Israeli version of October 7th. Very, very different. Where were you when you found out that there was a massacre? And what did you hear? I chapped an early mincha that day. The mincha closest to me in the Brooklyn section of Cedarhurst, where I live, is way after Shkia, in some shtibel. So I caught an earlier mincha. I didn't hear anything till I was walking in from Erev and Hakafas. No idea that anything had happened. Do you remember where you were and what it was like? What did you hear? I heard the number 100. I couldn't dance, just couldn't bring myself to do it. I heard the number 100, that 100 people had been killed in a terrorist attack. That was what I heard. I got up early the next morning. I don't generally, for halachic and hashkafic reasons, check a paper, probably ever, but certainly not on Shabbos and Yom Tov. But I ran out of my house at 6 in the morning to some other neighbor's yard who I knew was away and opened up his paper. And they were reporting 200 people. 200 people had been slaughtered, and my heart sunk. It was only after Yom Tov that most of us here in America got a sense of what had actually happened. They didn't know the numbers of people killed, but we realized this wasn't just a terrorist attack. Something had happened that had never happened before. That was the American experience, because it happened after Simchas Torah, after another day of Yom Tov. But in Israel, it was a much different story. In Israel, you were standing in shul, and if you were living in a neighborhood where the children serve in the army, you had throughout davening on the morning of Shmini Atzeres just people leaving, just your own kids. I have a friend who had 6 sons or sons-in-law called up over the course of that one day. The whole family was with him in Yerushalayim for Yantiv, and all 6 sons or sons-in-law got called up throughout the course of the day. And the word in Israel was not that there was a terrorist attack, but that there were Arabs, mechablim, there were terrorists in Israel, in Israeli towns, in Israeli citizens, that the border had been breached. In Israel, it was a very different story. there was a moment, there was just a moment, where people in Israel wasn't sure what was going to be. So we never faced that here. By the time you opened up whatever you use for news on Motzei Simchas Torah, you already knew they had most of the situation under control. There were still pockets, but it was a terrible thing, and we didn't know the extent of it, but it was under control. Those who were in Israel that day felt something that we haven't felt as a people for 50 years. 50 years. What's going to happen to Israel? What's going to happen to the lives that we live and our homes and our children? How far is this going to extend? The big word we're going to use, an existential threat, a threat to existence. Everybody assumed that, it can only go so far, but that was something that you felt if you were in Eretz Yisrael. And that's something that haunts the people that were there. I keep trying to talk to my friends in Israel. Most of my friends made Aliyah. They didn't stay here in America. Most of my friends made Aliyah at one point or another. The guys I went to Smicha with, guys I was in Yeshiva with, even the guys that I was in Rabbanos with, one by one, they pretty much made it to Eretz Yisrael. It's very hard to talk to them because their experience was completely different than our experience, and their experience at this point, they're shaken. Meso mutol lifneim. They're still there. We bring ourselves back to it, I think, but many of them are still holding there. That's the Yom Hazikaron part of today. They don't need to remember anything. It's mamish in front of them. And on some level, we need to struggle to make it right in front of us too. But if I'm correct, you also said Hallel here today. It's a strange Yom Hazikaron. And the reason why that's so appropriate is because even in Israel, after those first few hours, a very different feeling, those first few hours of really, for the first time in our lives, I don't know how many people here are older than 50 or I don't remember much from 50 years ago. Maybe just over 50. But the first time in our lives, even that moment was a fleeting moment. Even that moment of wondering what was going to be was soon replaced by the fact that we knew that there would be a response, and we knew that the army would, in time, bring the villages and bring the yeshuvim and bring the kibbutzim back under Israeli control. And that's something that we have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for. That even though we had a moment on Shmini Atzeres where a small portion, not us, but those who were living in Eretz Yisrael and those who were in the know in Eretz Yisrael had for a brief moment a question of what's going to be, but even that subsided very quickly. And we knew what would be. Because Rabbosai, every single one of us are living in a world where HaKadosh Baruch Hu has already given us Israel. And we take that for granted. And we take that for granted that even if things get very bad here in America, we can always just go to Israel. People are asking me, like, why aren't you packing up? Do you see what's going on? I work in New York City now, in Midtown. Not a fun place to be as a Jew. Why aren't you packing up? We all have our reasons. We all have our cheshbonos. But part of it is knowing in the back of my mind that Israel will be there if we ever need it. Do we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that? Or since we were born into Israel, do we just assume that that's there, like the air that we breathe and the water that we drink and all the other things that we barely thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for? When I went to Israel after high school, I went during the first Intifada. And I was in Gush Etzion. Not a great place to be during the first Intifada. And when we would take the bus from Yerushalayim out to Yeshiva, so it would not be uncommon for rocks to hit our bus. It was the rock Intifada, as opposed to the next one, which is the explosive Intifada, the second. It was the first Intifada. And we thought it was the most scary thing in the world. A little kid from Fairlawn, what do I know about people throwing rocks at my bus? It seemed to me to be the end of the world. And I remember going to a dinner just after I got back. That's about how long I went to yeshiva dinners in a little bit. You guys should continue to go for many, many years to the Heichal dinner, Mitzvah Hashem. I went a couple of years. Now I go if I know the honoree. I went to a dinner for the yeshiva for Gush. And Rav Amital, one of our saintly Rosh Yeshiva, got up to speak about how we should relate to the Intifada, which was still going on. Rav Amital survived the Holocaust. Rav Amital fought in 1948. Rav Amital got up and said, everything that's going on, the rocks, the terror, there was international outcry at the same time. There was nothing like what we're seeing today in terms of anti-Semitism. He said in Europe, in 1944, in Israel in 1948, it was not clear what was going to be. It was not clear. There was no way. Visit the museums when you get to Eretz Yisrael for the year, for 2 years. Visit the museums and see what the odds were in 1948. That a bunch of, you'll excuse me, Jews with guns. What do Jews know about guns? They don't even know what direction to shoot the gun. A bunch of Jews with guns fighting against actual armies, and they won. Impossible without the Yad Hashem. There's no military explanation whatsoever for what happened. It's impossible. Many of them were Holocaust survivors. They were able to fight back 5 Arab armies in 1948. And he said to us, I lived at a time where it wasn't clear what and if was going to be. This, what you're looking at, this will pass. Israel will survive. Israel will go forward. And for that, we need to thank the Ribono Shel Olam. For that, we need to thank the Ribono Shel Olam. That as bad as things are, and as difficult as things are in the streets, and even as we mourn, and even as we express our shock, and even as we wonder, what's going to be? How are we going to go on? We all know that we're going to go on because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has our back. The Americans, depends. Hopefully, they've done a lot. Thank God HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not following, does not need to follow in the ways of presidents and prime ministers. We know that Israel will be there because we know that the Ribono Shel Olam has gotten us to this point, and we know that Israel will live. Lo amus ki achya v'asaper maseka. We mourn the deaths of young people living near the Gaza border. But we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that after 2,000 years, we're able to live near the Gaza border. That's the perspective that's hard to have. Everything we're mourning for, we're only able to mourn for because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us a tremendous gift. We're able to mourn the fact that we have lost 760 soldiers since Shmini Atzeres. Think historically what that means. We have soldiers. None of us knows what it means to not have soldiers. None of us lived in Europe. None of us lived through the crusade. None of us lived through all this time. Jews have an army? Could you imagine someone waking up, going in a time machine from the time of the crusades and coming back and seeing that the soldiers were Jews? Everything that we mourn for this Yom Hazikaron is something that we need to celebrate. Or at least, if we can't fully celebrate this Yom Ha'atzmaut, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for. We are horrified by what we see on the college campuses. Please don't go to those college campuses. You shouldn't have gone before. Certainly don't go to those college campuses. I'm allowed to say that. Am I allowed to say that? Okay, good. We're horrified by what we see on the streets of Teaneck and in the halls of Congress. But yet, every one of us knows that we will be standing when they have fallen. And we don't know how long it's going to take till this madness dies down. And we don't know how long it is till life goes back to normal. But we know when things go back to normal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have our back. Shelo echad bilvad, amar aleinu l'chaloseinu, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyada. You know, every year at the Seder, and I stressed it so much at this Seder, and I stressed it so many people to say it this year, I stressed the fact that the night of the Seder is really one of the most important nights in our people's history, not just in the calendar. I don't know what happens at your Seder, but we went over the years from discussing every gematria and every single vort and every single Rashi Tevis to trying to talk about the real messages of the Seder. We moved away from the long drushes on Yacham or Rosh Chodesh to simple realities. That there's a God. That He guides Jewish history. That there's no way that we could have made it to this point without Him. And that He didn't bring us through all of history to abandon us now. As we go through the miracles at the Seder table, every single year I say the same thing. I say, the greatest miracle that we mark at the Seder is not the splitting of the sea, and it's not the Eser Makos. It's the fact that we're sitting and having a Seder in 2024. That we're still here. Everyone else is gone. Every single empire has fallen. I say, if you gave me two choices, all the way back then, all the way at Yom Suf, if I was standing at Yom Suf, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to me, Penner, you have two choices. You're going to have to pull off one of two miracles. Either I want you to split this sea in front of you. I need help. I want you to either take it upon yourself to split the sea in front of you, or I want you to have this moment remembered by actual descendants of these people who are going to be, by the way, the most hated people in the entire world, who will never become a significant force in terms of numbers. I want you to make sure that those people are still going to be around and talking about this thousands of years later. I would take the splitting the sea thing in a second. I don't know how I'd do it, but I would never sign up for the second. The mere fact that we're here, the mere fact that we have Eretz Yisrael, the mere fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has moved history in that way is the greatest miracle of all. The message of Yom Hazikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut this year, of Tavshin Pei Dalet, is not to ignore what happened. We need to feel it, and even if we can't, we need to identify with individual people and individual stories. We need to call our friends and family in Eretz Yisrael. But we also need to remember that we're not going anywhere, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to allow that. It's not only HaKadosh Baruch Hu's job to make sure we don't go anywhere, though. It's also ours. Probably the most famous story of Jewish martyrdom is the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is captured by the Romans for teaching Torah. And the Gemara tells us that as they're flaying his skin, he's saying Shema. And the students say to him, Ad Kan, really, Rebbe? Are you that frum? They're killing you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has seemingly abandoned you, and you're proclaiming. Why was Rabbi Akiva saying Shema at that moment? It's a good point to know. Well, one version, the Gemara tells us it was the Zman for Kriya Shema. But you should just know it's important for your own Shema when you say it every time in the day. Shema is a very particular statement. It's not just that there is one God. It's that whatever happens, it comes from Him. It's very important. The statement of Shema is not just that there's one God, but that anything that goes on in this world, even things that appear to be terrible, even things that seem to chas v'shalom, be out of His control, are all somehow coming from Him. That's why He was saying Shema on one level. He was saying that even this moment, the students were saying, Ad Kan, do you think that this comes from Hashem? How could that be? You're the great Rebbe Akiva. You're being killed by the Romans, tortured by the Romans. You're saying that even this is somehow under the control of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's Rebbe Akiva. Everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's also something more. Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Berkovitz, contemporary of the Rav, wrote a book in the early 1970s called Faith After the Holocaust. He says something so powerful about Rabbi Akiva's recitation of Shema, and something that every one of us can live up to. He points out that when we think of Kiddush Hashem, we think of a dramatic moment where somebody's given a choice, right? Have you ever wondered, what would you do if you were asked to give up your life? We always think of Kiddush Hashem as making that choice and saying, I know I could have an escape route. I know I could do X, but I'm going to decide to give up my life. It's so hard to relate to what that means. But he reminds us that Rabbi Akiva had absolutely no choice, right? They didn't say to Rabbi Akiva on his deathbed, you have one last chance. And if you promise that you'll stop teaching. Isn't it funny? The classic case of Kiddush Hashem, Rabbi Akiva on his deathbed, was a case where someone had no choice. It wasn't a dramatic moment of deciding what to do. It was just a Tuesday morning, and they had decided to kill Rabbi Akiva. And says Eliezer Berkovitz, but Rabbi Akiva was not responding to a situation. He ignored it. The Roman soldiers came to fetch him. They abused his body. It happened to be the time of the day when a Jew recites the Shema. Let the Romans do to him whatever they please. Rabbi Akiva would not be concerned with it. He had more important things to which to turn his attention. It was time for saying the Shema. What did it matter what Rome did to him? He went about his business of living the daily life of a Jew, continuing with the routine of Jewish existence and ignoring the world that is bent on crushing the Jew is one of the marks of Kiddush Hashem. Rabbi Akiva at that moment gave the ultimate punch back to the Romans. The ultimate thing. He couldn't stop them from torturing him. He couldn't stop them from killing him. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wasn't stopping it either. But it was time for Shema. And Rabbi Akiva said, you know what's important in the Roman Empire? Saying Shema this morning. And you know what's going to outlive the Roman Empire? Saying Shema this morning. Rabbi Akiva understood that we were going to outlast the Romans, but Rabbi Akiva understood that his role was to continue the mitzvos, the Torah and the mitzvos, the daily things. That is our ultimate answer to those who try to destroy us, to say, we will not be destroyed. We will not stop what we're doing because of you. It's It's very easy to get caught up. It's very easy to get scared about everything going on around us in Israel, on college campuses, on West Englewood Avenue. It's very easy to get caught up. It's very easy to spend our time looking and following and trying to figure out what's going to be. But this Yom Hazikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, I'm going to get you through this. I've gotten you through everything till this point. Much more powerful forces have tried to take us down. Much more powerful forces have tried to do that. And we're still here. And the way we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu is paying some activism is good, some attention, giving some of our emotional state to being in this difficult time. But as Rabbi Akiva, not to allow it to crush us. To sit in the Beis Medrash and learn, when you know there are rallies around the country, that's a Kiddush Hashem. To say Shema with Kavana, as you know that things look like they're falling apart, but you say, I know that they won't, because I know that the Jewish people have been here and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will get us through this, and my job is to channel Rabbi Akiva. It's time to say Shema, I'm going to say Shema. It's time to learn, I'm going to continue to learn. There's so many things to watch. Look what's going on. The best way that many of us can help is by ignoring those who want to take down the Jewish people. And to remind them that whatever they try to do, they can't and they won't. I'll end with an interesting quote from one of my Rabbeim, Chaverim, when I was Shana Aleph in the Gush. So I had the schus to learn at night with a young fellow who started to give Chabura. His name is Rabbi Moshe Tarragon. He's become quite a force and quite a voice. And he speaks of looking at everything that's going on now with the long view of Jewish history. And it's so hard for us when we're young to look with the long view at anything. Everything appears to be a year by year. But to look with the long view. Envisioning the long view of Jewish history restores faith and reinforces optimism. We face many uncertainties in the immediate present, but the larger narrative of Jewish future has already been written. We know exactly how this all ends. We just don't know how quickly it ends and how circuitous the route toward the terminus. Faith in Jewish history affords the confidence to navigate the adversities of Jewish history. I wish you a meaningful Yom Hazikaron, a meaningful Yom Ha'atzmaut, Chizku ve'imtzu, continuing, making sure that our enemies cannot win.
I know that the hour is late, but we are going to take this opportunity right now. If you notice in the screen, a good friend of mine, Captain Gabi Sackett from Eretz Yisrael. He's going to finish the last Mishnah of Seder Zraim for us. He's someone who was called to action on October 7th. He's someone who left his family for 4 months. And he's someone right now who hasn't seen his family in a number of weeks because he's defending and risking his life for each and every one of us. From Eretz Yisrael, Gabi is going to finish the last Mishnah of Seder Zraim and do the Hadron for us.
All right, so thank you, Rabbi Penner, for those kind words. I wanted to first of all thank the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Stechler, for this amazing opportunity, and my good friend Rabbi Rose also for reaching out. It's always a pleasure and a zchut to join. It is definitely a huge zchut to join this special occasion, ending this, making a siyum for you guys together, doing a siyum together on such a special occasion, Seder Zra'im, and especially at this moment. You know, here in Eretz Yisrael, we are literally minutes. It's like Shkia right now. It's mamash. We're at the turning point. Mi evel lesimcha, and we feel it here. We had a very, very hard day today. I attended a couple of ceremonies, a couple of mishpachot avelim, families who lost loved ones in the past few days. Some of them were from my division, and you know, I haven't really slept much the past, like right before this. I got onto the Zoom. I slept for about an hour because I didn't sleep at night. I think I got Rabbi Rose all nervous because he was calling me, and I was like, no, it's okay. I didn't sleep at night, so I just needed to grab some Z's before I joined this Zoom. I wanted to say that Rabbi Penner's words are felt very much here on the ground, because we all know in Eretz Yisrael that what happened on October 7th is not the Holocaust, but there's a lot of comparison to the Holocaust based on what happened in October 7th. Again, no one is saying that it was the Holocaust, but there was definitely no such scale of an attack on Jews since the Holocaust. But the difference is that in the Shoah and today, we have one thing today that we didn't have, and that's what Rabbi Penner was saying, in my opinion. I was relating to that. We have Tzahal with us today. We have the opportunity to protect ourselves, and for that, we need to thank Hashem every day, and that is, Baruch Hashem, a big difference between the Shoah and today, and Baruch Hashem for that. You know, I mentioned that we're finishing Yom Hazikaron right now, mamash. In about 20 minutes, Yom Hazikaron is over. Right before I jump into my Mishnah, I know that we're a bit behind schedule, and I'm just going to end with this thought and go into the Mishnah together. Yom Hazikaron in Eretz Yisrael is, of course, a sad day. I personally lost a lot of friends in battle, but while it is okay to be sad during times here and there, and especially on a day like today, it's important not to turn Yom HaZikaron into just a sad day. It needs to fill us with kochot and with pride, because on a day like today, we need to remember that we're part of a greater picture. Okay, life for Am Yisrael does not start when we are born. Life for Am Yisrael does not end when we pass on after Me'asrim Shana Be'ezrat Hashem. We are part of a greater picture. We're part of a nation, and that's very important to remember, because once we feel the success and the remembrance of people who gave their lives so that we could be here today and have what we have today, we're able to go into Yom Ha'atzmaut and celebrate. Ubemotam tzivu lanu et hachayim, and that is also why Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut are always together. Ubemotam tzivu lanu et hachayim. So Be'ezrat Hashem, Em Chayim El Torah, we all know. It is a zchut for me to pick up the Mishnayot and end with you all. So please all open up to the last Mishnah of Seder Zra'im, Masechet Bikurim, Perek Daled, Mishnah Hey. It is also, we're also finishing Masechet Bikurim, and we're also finishing Seder Zra'im. A beautiful opportunity and a special connection to Eretz Yisrael. All of these Mishnayot talking about mitzvot hatuluyot ba'aretz. Baruch Hashem, it's a big zchut. Just 3.5 or 4 years ago, I actually celebrated Shemitah with Rav Penner in Eretz Yisrael. It was a great zchut. It's something I'll never forget. And Bezrat Hashem, we should all be zocheh to celebrate and be mekayim mitzvot tuluyot ba'aretz, Shemitah, and so on together. Bimhera be'aminu. Mishnah Hey. I am starting, and we're continuing the last Mishnah of trying to figure out differences between androgynous and tumtum. Over here, we're talking specifically about androgynous. I'm not going to go into what it is, because by now you all know what it is. Keitzad eino shaveh lo la'anashim velo la'nashim. How is a androgynous not equal, not to men and not to women? En sorfin truma al tumat zivato. So over here, if a androgynous saw a tum'ah there's one kind of a tuma levan, one kind of a tuma adom. So if you see one or the other, ein solfin et truma lefi shetumato besafek. Over here, you're talking about a safek, so you do not burn the truma in this particular case. However, if a androgynous sees both kinds of tuma, so yes, you do burn it because there's no safek over there. Ve'en chayavin alav al bi'at mikdash. I'm moving forward in the Mishnah. Lo ka'anashim ve'lo ka'nashim. So in this particular case, if an androgynous saw a tuma levana or tuma aduma, and he goes into makom hamikdash, and he's, because you're not allowed to go into makom hamikdash when you're a tameh. So over here, you're not chayav you're not over the he's not over the isur over here of coming the makom hamikdash betuma. Why? Because the pasuk in Bamidbar is brought in the Gemara, mizachar ad nekeva teshalechu. So over there it's talking about someone who's vadai a zachar or vadai a nekeva, but an androgynous is a suffix, and therefore it is neither of them. Moving forward, ve'en nimkar be'eved ivri lo ka'anashim ve'lo ka'nashim. Now over here there's a difference between men and women. Why? Because men, there's a pasuk, it's talking in masculine, it says v'nimkar be'gnevato. It doesn't say be'gnevata. So bignevato is referring to someone who's specifically a man, and androgynous is definitely not a man. And with a woman, velo kanashim, over there there's someone who he could sell his young daughter to ama bito aktana, and androgynous is a suffix zachar, suffix nekeva, so you can't sell. The father can't sell his younger daughter in this case because he does not answer to that definition. Ve'eno ne'erach lo ka'anashim ve'lo ka'nashim. So over there also, there's a pasuk in the Torah that says, V'haya erkecha hazachar, so and so. V'im nekeva, so and so. And in this particular case, it's neither. V'im amar hareni nazir, shezeh lo ish ve'lo isha. If some random guy takes upon himself a neder of becoming a nazir, or just forget the neder part. Just if someone takes upon himself becoming a nazir, if the person that's walking by in front of him is a nazir, so that's the guy what you said. So in this particular case, yes, you are a nazir. Yes, it says the Mishnah says nazir, because someone who's an androgynous is not an ish gamor, and he's not an isha gamora. So in this case, that's what he said. Because again, he said in the Mishnah, nazir, lo ish velo isha. So over here, the Mishnah says, yes, he's a nazir. Rabbi Yossi Omer, androgynous bria b'fnei atzmahu. Why Rabbi Yossi all of a sudden says this? What's his chidush? There's a machloket on it, whether he's coming to explain, whether he's coming to add a suffix. We won't go into that now. V'lo yachlu chachamim lachriya alav im hu ish o isha. So b'chol mikre, We'll take with what Rabbi Yossi says, saying that an androgynous is not man, it's not woman, it's its own creation. Aval tumtum enoken, tumtum is a completely different story. Pa'amim shehu ish vadai, v'pa'amim shehu isha vadai. So over there, it's different. A tumtum could definitely be either or, we just don't know. But an androgynous is not either or, it's just neither. Okay, Baruch Hashem, Slik, Masechet Bikurim, Hadran Alach Seder Zraim. Hadran, so I'm going to go forward with the Hadrans and have everyone in mind for all the Mishnayot that we learned together. Hadran Alach Seder Zraim, Vehadran Alach, Alan, Datach Alan Seder Zraim, Vedatach Alan, Velo Nitshane Minach Seder Zraim, Velo Nitshane Minan, Lo Be'al Mahadem, Velo Be'al Mahadate. Haribna Adonai Lehne Divrei Toratcha Befinu Befiat Amcha Beit Yisrael, ונהיה כולנו ואנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולמדי תורתך לשמה. מאוהבי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך למען לבוש לעולם לא אשכח פיקודך כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך אמן 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 סלע ועד. מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאה אבותינו, ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש ולא מיושבי קרנות, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים ואנו משכימים לדברי תורה והם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר, והם עמלים ואינם מקבלים שכר. אנו רצים והם רצים, אנו רצים לחיי העולם הבא, והם רצים לבר שחת, שנאמר, ואתה אלוהים תורדם לבר שחת, אנשי דמים וממה לא יחצו מהם, ואני אפתח בך. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי. כשם שעזרתנו לסיים סדר זרעים, כך תעזרנו להתחיל ספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים ותלמידי חכמים הנזכרים בסדר זרעים תעמוד לי ולזרי, לנו ולזרנו, שלא תמוש התורה מפי זרנו וזרע זרנו עד עולם. ויקוים בנו בהתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך ותשמור עליך והקיצות תהי תשיחך, כי בי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה ושמאלה, עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דהוא עתיד להתאחדה ולהחיה מתיה ולהעסקה יתרון לחיי עלמא, ולמבנה קרתא דירושלם ולשכלל היכלה בגבה ולמקר פולחנה נוכרעה מערה ולעטבה פולחנה דישמיה ולעטרה וימליך קודשא בריחו במלכותי ויצמח פורקני ויקרב משיחי וחייפון וימכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל לשמי תקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ותושבחתה ונחמתה לאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידיון ועל כל תלמידיהון ועל כל מען דעסקין באורייתא די ועתרא הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר. יהי להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחסדה וחמי וחיי אבריחי מוזני רוויחי ופורקנה מן קדם ובורנתי ושמעה והרב ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיים וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Thank you so much for that beautiful siyum.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yasher Koach. You guys have a meaningful rest of Yom Hazikaron. We're going literally, I'm hanging up and we're going to Tfilah Chagigit with Hallel. We're going to daven everyone together and start the celebrations. Like I said, Ubemutam Tzivu Lanu et HaChaim. Yashar Koach.
Thank you so much. Toda Rabba.
Thank you.
We're going to try something. We're going to... And we'd sing lengthy songs. Doesn't seem appropriate right now when we are making a siyum in memory of those who passed away just on Yom Hazikaron. Just doesn't seem right. What I'd like to do is ask everyone to make one big circle. Take a second, and we'll sing Aleinu, and then we'll head out to lunch.